Thanks for coming out on this rainy night.
Yeah.
It's true. Once you get into here, I mean, you have to be in the rain, but once you're out of the rain, it's okay. Tonight's discussion will focus on a gift that the Torah gives to our marriage. Last class, if you remember, we were speaking about bringing sanctity into marriage through the couple achieving various levels of oneness through their intimate relationship. So we spoke about, level 1 of oneness was having in the right context, and level 2 we spoke about focusing on your spouse, and the third level we discussed last class was to bring something higher than the couple themselves into the marriage, working towards a higher goal. All these levels can be found within the framework and enhanced through the framework of this gift. And this gift that Torah gives to marriage is called Taharat HaMishpacha, otherwise known as the laws of family purity, otherwise known as the laws of Nida. Different terms used, but they all relate to the same thing. And that's what we're going to focus on in tonight's class, the gift that it brings to a marriage. But before we get into the what's and the how's of Taharat HaMishpacha, I think what we need to do is go back a little bit and explore the concept of purity itself. We translated Taharat HaMishpacha as family purity. What do we mean by purity? And its opposite, impurity. So today, we don't come across those concepts as much as we used to. And when I say we, I mean the Jewish people collectively at the times of the Bet HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. The times of the Bet HaMikdash, the concepts of purity and impurity were really part and parcel of daily life. Before someone could go into the Bet HaMikdash, bring an offering to the Bet HaMikdash, they needed to be in a state of purity. And there were various things that could put a person into a state of impurity, from which they would need to go through a process to get back into a state of purity. And it was part of living, it was part of life. This was something that was applicable to both men and women. Both men and women would sometimes find themselves in a state of impurity and would need to get back into a state of purity. That's number one. And number two, purity and impurity are not anything tangible. We can't smell it, see it, touch it. It's nothing to do with anything evil or anything dangerous. What is it exactly? It's like this. Purity, a state of purity, when someone finds or something is in a state of purity, it means that they are receptive to a flow of divine energy. They are receptive, they are open to receiving life. That's what a state of purity means. In contrast, a state of impurity means that a person who is in that state, or an object that is in that state, is in a state of an absence of life. And the most obvious example from the times of the temple was a corpse was considered impure. And anyone who would come in contact with the corpse would also find themselves in a state of impurity, because we're talking about a situation where there is an absence of life. It has nothing to do with being clean versus dirty, nothing to do with evil superstition. It's simply being receptive to life versus an absence of life. And for a person to transform, to go from one state to the other, if a person finds him or herself in a state of impurity, how to get back to a state of purity? Anybody know?
Go to the mikvah.
Perfect, beautiful. Through immersion in a mikvah. A mikvah is a pool of water but not just any pool of water. It's a pool of water meeting very exact specifications, which is a bit beyond the scope of tonight's class. But when one immerses in the mikvah, all of a sudden they are renewed, they are transformed from a state of absence of life to once again being ready to receive divine energy, to receive a new flow of life. So that's what tuma, impurity, and tahara, impurity. So opposite. Tuma, impurity, and tahara, purity is all about. So when we talk about taharat hamishpacha, family purity, we're talking about a system that encompasses the marriage that deals with a state of being receptive to life or a state of absence of life. And let's look more carefully at those details so we could apply this concept in the context of the laws of nida within a marriage. Any questions so far? Okay. So what we'll do to begin with is we'll explore some of the whats and the hows of the laws of family purity. Take a look in your student book. We're going to go back and forth a bit here on the text. We're going to begin actually with text 4, page 61. Okay, and this is from the book of Leviticus. So these laws are biblical. And it begins with this: when a woman has a discharge of blood, where blood flows from her body, she shall be a nida for 7 days. Okay, so first of all, first fact we're establishing here, the laws of nida revolve around a woman's monthly flow. Her period, in other words. Okay? Now, what are the repercussions of her blood starting to flow? So what if she's a nida? What does that mean for her? Let's continue on with text 5. And a woman in the ritually impure state of nida, you, talking to the man, shall not approach. Approach for what? For sexual relations. Okay, again, let's put this into the proper context. She is now considered, a woman who has begun her period is now considered to be a nida in a state of impurity. Why? Is there something wrong with her? Is she unclean? What is impurity all about? So as we said before, impurity implies an absence of life. And when a woman gets her period, that is exactly what is happening, because for the last 2 weeks, her uterus has been filling, the lining of the uterus has been filling with blood in anticipation of perhaps nurturing a potential life inside of her. When no life develops, what happens? That blood flows out. So that blood signifies a lack of life inside the woman, a state of impurity. And because at this time she is not receptive to life, there is a lack of life, she cannot have sexual relationships with her husband. It's not the time to create life. She is not open and receptive to life. So when she is a nida, the time of her period, she and her husband do not have any physical contact. Biblically, it's sexual relations, but the sages, to safeguard that, have added any physical contact, because you never know where any physical contact could lead between the couple, and we don't want them to end up in a place where they are not supposed to be in this time period when the wife is a nida. So obviously, her goal at this point is to get out of her state of nida and once again be receptive to potential life, the possibility of housing life inside of her. Which means, as we said before, she needs to get to the stage of mikvah, which causes that transformation, achieves that transformation. How does she get there? Text 6. Anybody want to read? Any volunteers?
7 days, and she shall shall be purified.
Okay, so this is very cryptic. Basically, she has to wait, first of all, till she stops bleeding, and that's a minimum of 5 days. Now, for a lot of women, it's going to be more than 5 days, and that's fine. But she cannot consider her period to be finished before 5 days. Okay? So whenever she stops bleeding, whether it's after 5 days or more, she does an internal check with a white cloth to make sure there is no more blood. And if there is no more blood, if she has been able to determine that through that check, she then counts 7 days. And during those 7 days, she again does these checks to make sure she has not resumed bleeding for any reason. And if throughout those 7 days, everything is good, there's no more blood, then after nightfall on the 7th day, she is ready for her renewal, for her transformation from one state to the other. She is now ready to go to the mikveh. And this is a very special time, actually. Very special time of the month for a couple. First of all, in order to go to the mikveh, there's some preparation involved. The mikveh water has to be able to cover every part of the woman's body, which means there can't be anything on her body that will come between her and the mikveh water. Even something we wouldn't necessarily think of, for example, a little hair. Right? We're not talking about clothing, not even jewelry, but even simply a little hair, a little flake of dry skin, a scab, that could potentially come between her and the water. And therefore, before she goes into the mikveh, she needs to do a very thorough cleaning, which, by the way, is one proof that mikveh has nothing to do with getting clean. It's not that she's dirty and she needs to go to the mikveh to become clean. In fact, she needs to be very, very clean, probably cleaner than she ever will be in that month, before she even immerses in the mikveh. So obviously the mikveh is something spiritual, intangible. It's not anything to do with dirt. The prevalent custom is for a woman to immerse 3 times. But there are many, many customs throughout the Jewish people. And generally, one would follow their mother's custom. So however many times their mother was accustomed to dipping, that's what the daughter would follow and pass on to her daughters. But I would say most people do 3, but again, whatever your custom is wonderful. Woman dips once, then recites a special blessing, and then does her subsequent immersions, however many she is accustomed to. And it's a very, very powerful, auspicious time for a woman to pray and ask God for whatever she may need, for health for her family and happiness, whatever it is she wants for herself, her husband, her children. This is a very powerful time. There's a very open line between her and God at that moment in the mikveh as she is undergoing this transformation to be ready to receive the flow of divine energy, the flow of life once again. It's a special time for prayer for a woman. So that's basically the nuts and bolts of the laws of family purity. Of course, this was a very brief overview. There's a lot more detail to it, and I'd like to say that if there's anyone who would like to learn in more detail and learn a little bit more about it, I am more than happy to sit down with you and arrange a time and go over it in more detail. But this is just a general overview of how it works. Now that we know how it works, we could examine what this does to a couple's marriage on many levels. So to preface that, I'd like to ask you to please turn to figure 3.1, and that is on page 56. So like I said, we're going to be going back and forth a bit here. What you have there is a chart. In the left-hand column, you have various mitzvot, which you're probably familiar with somewhat. They're central aspects of Judaism. And what I'm going to ask you to do is take a minute to think, to rate those mitzvot in order of their importance in the greater scheme of Judaism. Okay? 1 being the least fundamental, 10 being the most fundamental. So take your time, and if you have, when you're ready to share, go ahead.
For you personally, or do you think more for the Judaism in general?
You could rate however, on whatever level you feel you'd like to.
Well, I think this one, and I think this is the second.
Again, I would say that's the most important.
Shabbat feels pretty important.
Yeah.
And then this one, that one feels pretty important. Okay, so let's say make that 3, and then make kashrut 3. And then maybe.
Now, some could be on the same place of the scale too. Okay, you could have a few 3s or a few 9s or whatever. Okay, or 10s, or they could all be 10s or all be 1s. I hope not.
Or we rank them. Yeah.
Okay, anybody want to share what they came up with?
Okay, we ordered them though. You want to? Can I just share the ranking?
Of course.
So we thought that mikvah was most important,
Okay.
and then we thought second would be Shabbat,
Mm-hmm.
and then what did we say? Maybe Brit Milah. Either we were debating between Brit Milah and kashrut. We didn't really decide. And then those are the next ones, and then giving tzedakah, and then fasting on Yom Kippur.
Okay. Very interesting. Good job.
Rolling the dice.
Good job. Anyone who, now we're not going to get personal here, but anyone disagree with that rating?
About Brit Milah, because if you weren't circumcised at the right time, then you couldn't do any of these things.
Why would you say that?
I don't know. Well, if a baby's not circumcised at the right time, are they not considered Jewish if they're not circumcised?
Okay, that is a very interesting question. The answer is it really doesn't change the Jewishness of the child.
Okay.
A person is Jewish because they have a Jewish soul, which they receive because their mother is Jewish. Of course, having a Brit Milah is very fundamental and very important on many, many levels. But it does happen sometimes that a person does not receive a Brit Milah. It doesn't mean it's all or nothing. It doesn't mean that they can't perform other mitzvot as well.
Okay.
So it's a very interesting point.
Do they have to get one though at some point, or?
Well, it's a fundamental, as we're going to see soon. It's one of the mitzvot for which the Torah says if it's not performed, they're missing a very important link with God.
Okay.
So while, yes, it doesn't preclude a person from doing other mitzvot, nonetheless, they are missing something very, very important.
So we still have to do it.
Yes. Yes, it's one of the fundamentals of Judaism, 100%.
I won't join the anti-circumcision movement.
That's a good discussion for another class, actually.
That'd be really
Yeah.
interesting.
Okay, any other thoughts? Anyone come up with a different rating? So you ladies put mikvah at the top of your list. Anybody differ?
I thought Shabbat might be higher than that. but
Okay.
it was very difficult to do.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's not really. This is very theoretical because
Yeah.
really we don't rate mitzvot. They're all important and they all connect us to God in important ways. But this is obviously bringing out an important point. And that is that you ladies are correct in saying that mikvah is way up there with the fundamentals of Judaism. And it's beautiful to hear you say that, actually, because a lot of people don't realize that. There's a lot of misconceptions associated with Taharat HaMishpacha and mikvah. And people, it's maybe not as visible, high profile, shall we say, as other mitzvot. People aren't so educated about it necessarily, and wouldn't necessarily equate it with Shabbat or Brit Milah or any of the other fundamentals of Judaism. But the truth is, mikvah is up there with Brit Milah, with fasting on Yom Kippur, with not eating chametz on Pesach. All these biggies that everyone knows about, mikvah is up there too. It's definitely a fundamental. To the extent that if a community only has a certain amount of funding, which never happens, right? Never limited in funding. And they have to choose between building a synagogue, place to pray, house of worship, or building a mikvah. What should be their priority? To which project should the funding go?
It's the mikveh. Yes,
mikveh.
I knew that.
Exactly. Because you could pray anywhere.
Yeah.
But keeping the laws of family purity, which affects the couple, affects their children already born, affects any future children, you can't do it without a mikveh. And something that affects the family unit so strongly, we must have the tools, we must have what we need to perpetuate that. It's a huge responsibility of the women, of all of us, to keep that mitzvah up, and it has a tremendous, tremendous impact on the family unit. And in fact, if a community does not have the funds for a mikveh, they should even sell their Sefer Torah, their Torah scroll, to raise money to build a mikveh. That's how central the mikveh and the laws of family purity are in Judaism.
Are there a few in town? I know of one.
There's one at the moment. There's another one that's under construction, but I don't know when it's going to be ready. The Shari Tzedek Synagogue, 19th and Oak, they have a mikveh, actually a very, very beautiful mikveh. It was renovated not too long ago. We actually once did a mikveh tour. If anyone's interested, we could do it again. I could show you around there. It's really beautiful. It's like a spa experience. Yeah, no, it is. It's really, really nice. Now, it's interesting. You know, these days, we don't come, like I said before, we don't really encounter purity, impurity situations very much. One of the only places where we find these concepts still existing on a practical level today is within a marriage. When a woman becomes a nida and a couple cannot have any physical contact. It's really one of the only places we find it today. And it's interesting to draw a comparison, you know, just like in the times of the temple. For someone to enter the temple, they had to go to the mikveh. They had to re-enter a state of purity before they could approach. Before a woman enters into her personal temple, as we spoke about last class, before a woman enters the holy of holies of her temple, which is the intimate, the physical intimate relationship between a couple, she also needs to go to the mikveh. She also needs to go through that renewal process because she's approaching something very, very holy.
And the same concept doesn't exist for men?
Not today. Men do go to the mikveh today for various reasons, but it's not biblical. It's a custom. So it's in a totally different league.
It's just schwitzing, right?
It's, when a man goes to the mikveh, it's also for the purpose of a spiritual renewal, because there's something very spiritual about a mikveh, but he's not obligated to go to the mikveh. It's a custom because it's a wonderful thing to enhance one's spirituality. So, for example, many men have a custom before Shabbat to immerse in the mikveh. Many men, especially amongst the Hasidic men, have a custom to immerse in the mikveh every day before prayer because they're about to approach God, undergo a spiritual experience of connection with God. They want to prepare first by going into the mikveh. But again, it's not biblical. It's a matter of custom, a matter of enhancing their spirituality. Whereas when a woman goes to a mikveh in her marriage in order to resume relationships with her husband, it's a mitzvah. It's a biblical mitzvah. So it's in a whole, it takes on a whole different power and meaning.
This is a little off topic, but I heard that there's a Sephardi tradition to go in your 9th month of pregnancy.
Yes, I've heard that also. I'm not sure even if it's only Sephardi. I think there might also be some Ashkenazi women that do it. Yeah. It's a custom. You know, some do, some don't. It's a beautiful custom if that's something that you do to prepare for the birth, you know, the giving of life. Women also do have a custom, many women have a custom to go before Yom Kippur. Again, we're approaching a very spiritual day, so both men as well go to the mikveh before Yom Kippur. But the biblical requirement is in a marriage, in the context of a marriage. And that potency. You can't get that potency in any other immersion in the mikveh. It's in a marriage.
What happens when a woman's gone through the menopause? How does it work then?
Okay, that's an excellent question. So really the cycle of the mikveh and the family, being separated physically, husband and wife separating physically and then coming together physically, that is generally taking place while the woman is going through her physical monthly cycle. Having said that, if a woman never went to the mikveh in her life and she's already post-menopause, she can still go to the mikveh just one time, and it retroactively affects all her children that were already born and brings a certain sanctity to her marriage even now. So a woman would not go on a regular basis after menopause unless she is bleeding for whatever reason, and there's always unique circumstances and a rabbi should be consulted, but generally not on a regular basis. But again, if she's never gone, it's not too late. She can still go.
What about somebody who's very religious and goes every month? When they go through the menopause, they just stop as well? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, if there's no more bleeding, then there's no more need to do it.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, of course, even when a woman is still pre-menopause and still in her childbearing years, not always is she going to be going to the mikveh regularly, for example, during pregnancy, when there's a life inside of her. So, there's always... life takes us in different directions, but that is generally when it takes place. Any other questions before we move on? These are all excellent questions. Okay, so we got to the what's and the how's, and even some of the who's. Is there a why? We say how, a woman starts bleeding, she's in a state of nida, a state of impurity, and needs to wait till she's done, she needs to count 7 days and do checks, and when there's no more bleeding, she goes to the mikveh, and then she's allowed to be with her husband again. Is there a why to all of that? What do you think?
Well, on practical terms, it must give her a break. It's kind of like...
Yes, you have a good point.
Men are like a total pain in the butts and they snore and she gets to go to her own room and that's awesome. Right?
Okay, I hear you. And you know what? We're going to actually touch on that. So it's a good point. We're all laughing, but we're going to get to that.
I'm sure there's something else, but...
It's good for the man too.
Okay, why do you say that?
Well, because I don't know how to put it into words, but he gets to, honor his wife a little bit, thinking about her by not touching her in that time, and it just brings respect to the marriage.
Okay, beautiful. Would anybody like to add anything to that?
Well, they learn how to connect on other levels, right? Not just physical.
Beautiful. Mm-hmm.
I remember before we got married, I had a mikveh class, like specific for mikveh, and my teacher told me that, mentioned me that, getting used to go to the mikveh is like the best way to have your marriage long forever.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's very, very, very special for the marriage, not just for the women, but for the men, but for the whole the couple.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe because of what you have been mentioned.
Right.
You have to have a break. Right.
Absence makes the heart go
together. Yeah. I remember that very particular, I think.
Yeah, it's true, and you're all bringing up really beautiful points, and I would like to develop them further soon. But what I'd first like to mention, and I think this is a very important point to mention, is that while there may be different aspects to Taharat HaMishpacha that appeal to a couple on various levels, that inspire a couple on many levels, ultimately, the reason why God asked us to keep these laws, the ultimate reason, is beyond our logic. There's 3 categories of mitzvot. Are you familiar with that? You ever hear of this concept? You take a look, actually, in your student book, figure 3.3. You have a little chart there as well, with the 3 different categories. Every one of our commandments from God, and commandments found in the Torah, can be found in one of these 3 categories: mishpatim, or eidot, or chukim. Briefly, quick definition of each of the categories. Anybody, feel free to look in your chart. You should have it there. Okay, what's an example of a mishpat, one of the mishpatim laws? Anyone give me an example, please?
Well, they're kind of straightforward moral laws that the whole society follows.
Exactly. Even if we weren't told by God to keep these laws, if you're a moral, ethical person, we would probably think of it on our own. For example, not to steal, not to kill. Yeah, okay. So that's the first category. Second category, what we call testimonials or edot. What are those exactly? So in a nutshell, those are mitzvot that remind us of central truths of Judaism or remind us of major events that occurred in our history. So for example, keeping Shabbat or the holidays remind us of various events in our history like the creation of the world, Exodus from Egypt, major turning points in our history. Or we have the mezuzah or the tefillin, which reminds us of the oneness of God because it contains Shema, reminds us of a central tenet of our faith. So these are laws which we probably wouldn't come up with on our own, but once we have them, God gave them to us. Oh, this makes sense. We're going to commemorate that, commemorate this, remember this. Makes sense. It's not illogical. Then we have the third category, the chukim. Chukim, we would never come up with on our own. Even now that we have them, we can't necessarily figure out why we do it the way we do it, other than the fact that God told us to. For example, we have here an example, kosher. Why should we not mix meat and milk? Why do we only eat meat that was slaughtered a certain way? Really? I mean, we could find a million benefits if we really wanted to, and there are benefits, but the bottom line reason is we're not quite sure. God has his reasons, so we accept that. Now, which category do you think the whole concept of tahara and tuma, purity and impurity, are in?
The hukim.
Okay, you say chukim. Why?
Because we don't really understand why.
Why is this considered to be in a state of purity? Why this isn't? And why this will bring one from one state to the other and why it transfers this way? We're not really quite sure. So ultimately, taharat hamishpacha, family purity, the fact that when a woman starts to bleed, she's considered a nida, and she has to go through this whole process in order to come out of that state. We're not really sure why God planned it all like that. Mm-hmm. So while, yes, there are certain aspects of it which make sense to us, which appeal to us, which inspire us, ultimately that's not the whole picture. It's not the bottom line reason of why God gave it to us. And in fact, what inspires me about keeping family purity might not inspire you. And what inspires you might not inspire me. And maybe there's someone, none of it inspires them. They can't stand the whole thing. It's very difficult. They find it very challenging. That could be too. And it could also be that what inspires me now about family purity, that might not apply a month from now. So it might not be so inspiring anymore. So whatever appeals to us on a personal level about it is not necessarily enough to create a commitment to keeping it in our marriage. And that's why ultimately it's a chok. We do it because God said. Even if it makes sense, doesn't make sense, today we like it, tomorrow we don't, next month it's a pain in the neck, we commit to it because God asks us to, whether we understand it, whether we like it or not. And this is a very powerful connection we have to God. The connection that we could achieve through performing a chok, a mitzvah that we don't understand with our human logic. It's very, very powerful. I mean, think of a human relationship, which is basically our subject, the series. Whether it's a relationship with a spouse, with a child, with a parent, a boss. You know, sometimes we're asked to do something, and we can understand why that person is asking. Our spouse needs us to do something. It makes sense. Our spouse requires us right now to make supper. Yeah, he's hungry. It's supper time. Or our boss requires us to fill out a certain report. Yeah, it needs a report. Things need to be organized. Paperwork needs to be done. We understand that. And so we do it. But sometimes we're asked to do something that to us makes no sense. For example, let's say your spouse likes pickles with his peanut butter. Like, really? I should cut up a pickle to put in your peanut butter sandwich, extra work for me? It's not even normal. But maybe it doesn't make sense to me and I don't like it, but he likes it. Or my boss sends me on an errand that really is incomprehensible to me. but the boss requires it. When we do something for somebody else in our life, even when we don't understand it, that really shows the ultimate respect for that person, or love for that person, or both. Because it's not about me. It's really only about that other person, because if it was up to me, I wouldn't do it. And it's the same thing with our relationship to God. When God asks us to implement something in our life that we really don't understand, but we do it anyways because we know it's important to God, that shows a very deep level of commitment, a very deep level of connection. And that's ultimately what Taharat HaMishpacha is all about. However, having said that, we all know that marriage can sometimes be quite complex. And many couples find that the system of Taharat HaMishpacha, the weeks of separation, the mikvah, the weeks of togetherness, greatly benefits a marriage. And you ladies have already brought up some ideas of how the system might benefit a marriage, and that's what I'd like to spend a little bit of time discussing right now. So I think it was, someone mentioned the advantage to a separation, a planned separation. I remember who brought that up.
Maybe me.
Was it you? Yeah, Natalie, you brought that up? Mm-hmm. Take a look at text 8, page 64. Rabbi Meir taught, a Talmudic sage, Rabbi Meir, he taught the following. Why did the Torah mandate that a nida should be forbidden to her husband for 7 days? Okay, this is the quote from the Talmud. Today, the sages have defined it a little bit differently for us because it was necessary to do a little bit more than 7 days for various reasons. It's beyond the scope. But anyhow, it doesn't change the point here. Because otherwise, being in continuous contact with his wife, he might become disenchanted with her. Makes sense, right? The Torah therefore ordained, let her be a nida for 7 days, in order that she shall be beloved by her husband, as on the day she entered the chuppah.
How romantic is that?
Yeah. It's a truth, right? Separation breeds desire. When we desire something, it's because we don't have that thing. Right? When we have it, we don't desire. It's there.
That's true.
Right?
I can see why there's a little bit of criticism of the whole purity thing with that kind of quote, though, because it's all about the man needing to desire her, and she has to go away so he doesn't get bored, and you know what I mean, maybe it could have been written better.
Okay, but I think but I think between the lines, we're talking about a mutual desire between the couple.
Yeah. Then we should
if the husband, but not necessarily, because when the husband treasures her wife, that's in reality, that's what we need. That's what women need.
Yeah.
You know, husbands and wives, we're going to get to this next class, but we're wired differently. Men and women are wired very differently. And for a man, it might not be, as you were saying, Sue, it might, and we're going to discuss this more, it doesn't necessarily come naturally for him to always value and appreciate his wife, because that's how men are. But as a woman, we really need that.
Yeah.
So this is the Talmud talking to the man, this is what he needs to hear.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's mutual. Both the husband and the wife want to have an excitement and a passion in their relationship. So this separation is not only for the husband, it's for the wife as well. And when both are in love with each other, it only benefits both of them.
That's true.
Right? So it's really an amazing concept, because when a husband and wife cannot have physical contact whenever they want, they don't take that time when they can have physical contact for granted. Mm-hmm. And when they are in the period of nida, they are anticipating being together. How many couples who were married for 30 years can say they still anticipate being together? Mm-hmm. But if you have that system of Taharat HaMishpacha in your marriage, if you have those laws of family purity, well, yes, there are going to be times when you are counting down the days to being together again, no matter how many years you were married.
Do you actually sleep in separate rooms? Or
No,
just
separate beds.
Oh,
Separate beds.
Same room, separate beds.
Yes, because it's just about the couple not having physical contact. But as we will see soon, there's a lot more to the marriage that the couple can share at that time.
Okay.
Okay? So this really puts a couple's intimate life center stage. It's a priority for them. They know exactly when the last time they were together was, and they're literally counting the days, like a bride and groom, a man and women who are engaged and waiting for their wedding. This couple, no matter how many years they're married, if they're in a time of nida, they are literally counting the days. You have to count the 5 days, the 7 days, until they can be together again. And that really renews their passion, renews their love. As we have the quote from the Talmud, it's as if it's their wedding night all over again. It's constant honeymoons in a marriage, which keeps it from getting boring or stale. It's built in naturally to the system of Taharat HaMishpacha that the marriage should remain exciting. And sometimes it takes a separation to create that excitement. That's normal. It's like that with everything in life. In fact, very often it happens, a couple argues, so that brings them apart. And when they make up, their relationship feels even closer and their intimacy is even more intense because they made up after a fight. So let's put it this way, ladies. Instead of waiting for an emotional separation in a marriage through an argument, why not implement natural physical breaks, physical separations in a marriage that will bring the couple together? And that is what Taharat HaMishpacha does to a marriage. It's that natural physical break. And in fact, I hear therapists sometimes recommend this to couples who are complaining that their marriage is getting stale or boring. They say, well, separate a little bit from each other, so then it becomes exciting again. You don't take it for granted.
What a gift.
Mm-hmm.
What a gift God gave to marriages.
Exactly. That's what it is. So that's one gift of Taharat HaMishpacha to a marriage. But there's even more. And some of them you've mentioned, actually. It's human nature to crave that which is forbidden. So again, what we have built in to Taharat HaMishpacha, built into this system, is an opportunity to tap into this truth, this very human truth, to the advantage of a marriage. Meaning, your spouse is forbidden. That makes your spouse very tempting, very desirable. And there's no need for a spouse to look outside the marriage to something that's forbidden, God forbid, because the forbidden is so attractive. Within the marriage itself, the spouse is forbidden and becomes attractive.
I actually heard a nice analogy to that. When you take a soda bottle and you shake it, and all the carbonation is stuck inside. It's almost like the time when the woman is nida, and she has these strong feelings to her husband, and she can't express them. And he has strong feelings towards her, but he can't express them. So it's this feeling of longing, but it cannot be expressed, that carbonation that can't come out of the bottle. So it's being shaken and shaken and shaken, and the day she goes to the mikvah, they open up the tap.
Very nice.
A great marriage.
That's right. And if it happens on a regular basis,
That's right.
That's it. So it's a good recipe. Yeah. It's good. It works.
Unless, I just had a thought, if, say the couple was in a time where they weren't getting along, maybe fighting, and then they come to the time of the nida, and maybe the man is pulling even further away because they have been fighting or whatever, and then that time comes and...
Yes, it's a good point. And in general, we're talking about a healthy marriage with the normal ups and downs of a marriage. In a case like that, the couple should really consult a rabbi and find out what to do, because it's actually very clear from the Torah that a couple should not be intimate if they're not, if they're forced to, because it's the mikvah night and they have to. It should really be something that they're mutually enjoying, and it should be a beautiful time. So, yes, there are always exceptions, and that's a time to consult a rabbi. That's a good question. Another point I'd like to bring up. Everyone wants a passionate marriage, right? Sounds good. But can we put passionate and marriage in the same sentence. Marriage is security, stability, reliability. Passion is constant change, novelty, not so reliable necessarily. Could a person have a passionate marriage?
Yes.
Okay, before we debate that issue, take a quick look in your books at text 2. We won't read it out loud, just give it a quick read through. It's an English text there, from a book by Esther Perel, who's a well-known therapist and speaker, deals with relationships. She questions this. She's not so convinced, right? She's not so convinced that couples' marriage could provide the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Security and novelty. So is that too much to expect? Is this a case of, having your cake and eating it? Is it too much to ask from one marriage, from one person to provide?
Yeah, because in our culture, especially in this city, often couples will cocoon together, and then their lives will become very intertwined in not such a healthy way. Whereas in a community, you have friendships that are almost as important, or other family relationships, and so maybe there's more balance. Whereas it's a lot of pressure to just get your everything out of your spouse.
Mm-hmm. But should we be able to? Do you think that's really an ideal we should strive for in a marriage, to have both the security and the novelty? And the passion?
Someone who's married might want to answer.
You think so? Looks like the married ladies here do think we should be getting that.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I do think it's possible, but I think it doesn't happen on its own. I think it kind of has to be strived for, or worked towards, or whatever.
Yes, that's a very good point.
It's not easy,
No,
It's not easy.
exactly.
but it's achievable.
Right. Okay, so I'll put it this way. Until now, we've been talking about the nida time as a bit of an inconvenience, a time we kind of want to run through, but we know it's worth it because at the end, it greatly enhances the time when the couple comes close together. So it seems like, based on what we said until now, the time of nida is a means to an end. But what I'd like to address now is a different perspective, where the time of nida has a benefit in and of itself. In music, there are rests and there are notes. In a speech, sometimes the lecturer is speaking, sometimes the lecturer is pausing. Now, how to look at those rests and those pauses? Is it just simply the musician or the speaker needs to catch breath for a minute and take a rest and then could get back to the main idea, which is what the music that's being playing or the words that are being spoken? It's not like that at all. In fact, the rests are part of the music. The rests add rhythm and beauty to the notes that are being played. And the pause is actually part of the speech. The pause lends impact to the words that the speaker is saying. The time of nida, when a woman is in nida, when a couple does not have physical contact, when there is a rest or a pause from physical contact between the couple, it's a time to address other aspects of marriage. For example, you ladies have mentioned very correctly, verbal communication, emotional connection, friendship. You mentioned this, I think, Natalie, personal space. These are all other very important aspects to a marriage that the time of nida is a perfect time to focus and work on those aspects. And when those aspects of marriage are addressed, it lends beauty and impact to the physical aspect of the relationship as well. Especially as we know, as women, we need that emotional closeness to really enjoy and appreciate the physical closeness as well. They go together. All these other aspects of marriage really round out and create a balance for the physical aspect of the marriage as well. So for example, if a couple's having an argument during the time of nida, they can't just, resolve it with some physical touch and they move on from there. They need to create a dialogue. They need to talk if they want to resolve the issue. It also allows the couple time to explore other ways of connecting. Emotional connections, intellectual connections. To gain a deeper understanding of each other. To get to know each other better on different levels. And especially that time of month for a woman really craves her personal space then, and really craves emotional connection then over physical connection. So far from the time of nida being repressive to a woman, I would say it's really a tremendous gift to a woman. Like you were saying, Sue, it forces the husband to really respect the woman for who she is, not to objectify her, and to look at her as a whole person. There's more to her than her body. She has a mind. She has interesting things to speak about, to give. They could have fun together. There's so much more to her. That is a tremendous, tremendous gift to a woman, specifically at that time of month. So what we see here is that the nida time addresses the stability and the security of marriage. And the time following the mikvah, when the couple can come together again physically, the days of tahara, as we call them, the days of purity, that addresses the passion and the novelty of marriage. So what we see here is something very powerful, something very beautiful about the Jewish system of marriage. That the Jewish system of marriage, the laws of family purity, really merge these two needs that a couple has in a marriage by alternating from one set of needs, the security, stability, to the other set of needs, the passion, the novelty, approximately every 2 weeks. So is there such thing as a passionate marriage? Yes, evidently so. But like you said, Pam, it doesn't happen on its own. And the system of Taharat HaMishpacha, putting a marriage in that context, really enables a couple to implement both in a very natural, consistent way. In fact, it's very interesting if we look at a couple of the blessings that are said under the chuppah. When a couple becomes joined, their souls become joined, they become married in a Jewish marriage. You know what, you could actually see it for yourself in here. Text 10. We have text 11 as well. I don't think we're going to have time to actually, we won't have time today to actually go into text 11, but I encourage you in your own time to take a look because it's very interesting how we see this so clearly. This is the Jewish approach to marriage, but we'll see it at least in text 10. Okay, this is the sixth blessing of the Sheva Brachot, of the blessings we give to the bride and groom under the chuppah. Grant abundant joy to these loving friends as you bestowed gladness upon your created beings in the Garden of Eden of old. Blessed are you, God, who gladdens the groom and bride. So how are we addressing the bride and groom in this blessing? Very interesting. Two terms merging as one here. Anybody? Grant abundant joy to these loving friends, because that really is what we want to achieve in a marriage. Love, that's the passion, and friendship. the other levels of marriage, the comfort, the security, getting to know each other on all levels. So we see that Taharat HaMishpacha is really a gift to marriage. It addresses the oneness, the potential for oneness that a couple can achieve on all levels. But more than the personal benefits to a couple that it brings to marriage, it also brings something larger than the couple themselves to the marriage, which is the third level of oneness that we discussed last class. And I'm going to end off with this. Take a look at text 17. We have some verses that we would never really associate with this topic. Anyone know where these verses are from? Text 17, page 73. Okay, anyone recognize these verses? Beginning of our Torah, the very beginning when the world was created. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, what did the world look like in the very beginning? Second verse, it tells us here.
Formless and chaotic.
Yeah, exactly. Formless and chaotic. It didn't really look like anything. It was formless and chaotic and dark until it was dark and chaotic until God's Spirit hovered over it, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So let's analyze this briefly. Figure 3.6, page 74. The earth was formless and chaotic, meaning when God is not in the picture, when things are left to their own devices, it gets a little chaotic, right? Things become chaotic. There can only be chaos. And then what? The verse continues, and darkness on the face of the deep. In a state of chaos, nature can give rise to anything. So this chaotic state of the world led to spiritual darkness, the possibility of evil. But then what happened? God's Spirit hovered over the face of the water. God exerted his guidance and providence, bringing order to the chaos. And finally, at that point, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Once the chaos became controlled, God was now guiding the chaos of the world. It was no longer chaotic. There was no longer this resulting darkness, the darkness that came as a result of the chaos, and now there could be light, an awareness of godliness. In other words, whenever there is a void, which is basically what the world was until God made order of it, whenever there is a void, there is a possibility to breed negativity. And you could see this on every level. So, even what happens if you have holes in your wall in your house? Anyone experience this? What kind of problem do you get? Right? You might have a rat infestation, right? You have a void, you have a hole, it breeds negativity. You might have a rat nest. Or a cavity, a hole in the tooth. What grows there? What happens? Decay, rot, breeding negativity. On a deeper level, someone has a void in their life, the loss of a job or the loss of a relationship. What often will come to fill that hole, to fill that void? Yeah, not good things. Depression, possibly. Alcohol.
Drugs.
Good, drugs. Or even maybe not as extreme, but a person kind of, wasting away their time, not being productive, filling it with bad habits, which can lead, to the ultimate bad habits, as you're saying, Pam. And more specifically, when there is a void of meaning in a person's life, when there is a lack of a higher purpose, then what comes to fill that hole, that lack, is chaos, is spiritual darkness. There's a lack of direction. But when a person has meaning in their life, when they allow God into their life and they have guidance and direction, then that darkness is banished and light fills the life. And that's what we learn from these first few verses of the Torah. When there's a void, when there's chaos, breeds darkness, breeds negativity, breeds rot. When God comes into the picture, it's replaced with light. Things are controlled, things are guided, there's a direction. Now this is a metaphor for marriage. Because marriage has its ups and downs. Things are often, I shouldn't say always, but often changing in a marriage. And that could be a very good thing. Change could lead to growth, to excitement. But sometimes change can also lead to chaos and disaster. When we bring God's guidance into a marriage, then that change is guided, that change is controlled, that change is directed. So then there is light in the marriage, there is happiness, there is meaning, there's sanctity versus chaos in the marriage or an absence of meaning, darkness, unhappiness. And that is the ultimate benefit of Taharat HaMishpacha. Whether it makes sense to us or not, whether we relate to Taharat HaMishpacha or not, we may not. Whether it inspires us or not, the fact that we're bringing God's super rational, it means it's beyond our logic. We're bringing God's super rational direction into our marriage, brings light and holiness into the marriage. And that is the ultimate gift that Taharat HaMishpacha gives to a marriage. Something greater than the personal benefit, something greater than the couple themselves. A light, direction, meaning, the ultimate gift. Let's continue on with text 5. And a woman in the ritually impure state of nida, you, talking to the man, shall not approach. Approach for what? For sexual relations. Okay, again, let's put this into the proper context. She is now considered, a woman who has begun her period is now considered to be a nida, in a state of impurity. Why? Is there something wrong with her? Is she unclean? What is impurity all about? So as we said before, impurity implies an absence of life. And when a woman gets her period, that is exactly what is happening, because for the last 2 weeks, her uterus has been the lining of the uterus has been filling with blood in anticipation of perhaps nurturing a potential life inside of her. When no life develops, what happens? That blood flows out. So that blood signifies a lack of life inside the woman, a state of impurity. And because at this time she is not receptive to life, there is a lack of life, she cannot have sexual relationships with her husband. It's not the time to create life. She is not open and receptive to life. So when she is in nida, the time of her period, she and her husband do not have any physical contact. Biblically, it's sexual relations, but the sages, to safeguard that, have added any physical contact, because you never know where any physical contact could lead between the couple, and we don't want them to end up in a place where they are not supposed to be, to a flow of divine energy. They are receptive, they are open to receiving life. That's what a state of purity means. In contrast, a state of impurity means that a person who is in that state, or an object that is in that state, is in a state of an absence of life. And the most obvious example from the times of the temple was a corpse was considered impure. And anyone who would come in contact with the corpse would also find themselves in a state of impurity, because we're talking about a situation where there is an absence of life. It has nothing to do with being clean versus dirty, nothing to do with evil superstition. It's simply being receptive to life versus an absence of life. And for a person to transform, to go from one state to the other, if a person finds him or herself in a state of impurity, how to get back to a state of purity? Anybody know?
Go to the mikvah.
Perfect, beautiful. Through immersion in a mikvah. A mikvah is a pool of water, but not just any pool of water. It's a pool of water meeting very exact specifications, which is a bit beyond the scope of tonight's class. But when one immerses in the mikvah, all of a sudden they are renewed, they are transformed from a state of absence of life to once again being ready to receive divine energy, to receive a new flow of life. So that's what tuma, impurity, and tahara, impurity. So opposite. Tuma, impurity, and tahara, purity is all about. So when we talk about taharat hamishpacha, family purity, we're talking about a system that encompasses the marriage that deals with a state of being receptive to life or a state of absence of life. And let's look more carefully at those details so we could apply this concept in the context of the laws of nida within a marriage. Any questions so far? Okay. So what we'll do to begin with is we'll explore some of the whats and the hows of the laws of family purity. Take a look in your student book. We're going to go back and forth a bit here on the text. We're going to begin actually with text 4, page 61. Okay, and this is from the book of Leviticus. So these laws are biblical. And it begins with this. When a woman has a discharge of blood, where blood flows from her body, she shall be a nida for 7 days. Okay, so first of all, the first fact we're establishing here, the laws of nida revolve around a woman's monthly flow. Her period, in other words. Okay? Now, what are the repercussions of her blood starting to flow? So what if she's a nida? What does that mean for her? Go back a little bit and explore the concept of purity itself. We translated taharat hamishpacha as family purity. What do we mean by purity? And its opposite, impurity. So today, we don't come across those concepts as much as we used to. And when I say we, I mean the Jewish people collectively at the times of the Bet HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. The times of the Bet HaMikdash, the concepts of purity and impurity were really part and parcel of daily life. Before someone could go into the Bet HaMikdash, bring an offering to the Bet HaMikdash, they needed to be in a state of purity. And there were various things that could put a person into a state of impurity from which they would need to go through a process to get back into a state of purity. And it was part of living, it was part of life. This was something that was applicable to both men and women. Both men and women would sometimes find themselves in a state of impurity and would need to get back into a state of purity. That's number one. And number two, purity and impurity are not anything tangible. We can't smell it, see it, touch it. It's nothing to do with anything evil or anything dangerous. What is it exactly? It's like this. Purity, a state of purity, when someone finds or something is in a state of purity, it means that they are receptive. Thanks for coming out on this rainy night.
Yeah.
It's true. Once you get in to hear. I mean, you have to be in the rain, but once you're out of the rain, it's okay. Tonight's discussion will focus on a gift that the Torah gives to our marriage. Last class, if you remember, we were speaking about bringing sanctity into marriage through the couple achieving various levels of oneness through their intimate relationship. So we spoke about, level 1 of oneness was having in the right context, and level 2 we spoke about focusing on your spouse, and the third level we discussed last class was to bring something higher than the couple themselves into the marriage, working towards a higher goal. All these levels can be found within the framework and enhanced through the framework of this gift. And this gift that Torah gives to marriage is called Taharat HaMishpacha, otherwise known as the laws of family purity, otherwise known as the laws of Nida. Different terms used, but they all relate to the same thing. And that's what we're going to focus on in tonight's class, the gift that it brings to a marriage. But before we get into the what's and the how's of Taharat HaMishpacha, I think what we need to do is go